The ideal way to handle a dog's reactivity is to prevent a reaction before it happens. This video, which is the second in our series on managing reactivity, explains how to use management to ensure a dog stays under threshold when potentially exposed to a trigger that might cause an excessive reaction. The obvious reason to prevent a dog from reacting is that it can result in a situation that is unpleasant for you, the dog, and others, as well as being potentially hazardous. There are some less obvious reasons that have long-term implications on the dog's behavior and mental well-being. One of those is the compounding effect on a dog due to repeated exposure to stress hormones released during an excessive reaction. Over time, this type of repeated exposure can have a negative impact on a dog's mental health. Another problem is that reacting to a trigger can become a learned behavior that is hard to address, requiring a potentially long process to counteract it. Fortunately, there are an almost unlimited number of ways to prevent a reaction. Collectively, we refer to these as management because we are managing the dog and its exposure to the environment it is in. There are two keys to successfully using management. First is knowing what the dog's triggers are. It is also important to understand that a dog may react to a trigger differently in different situations and environments. Second is being observant. Ideally, you will observe a trigger before the dog does and can act to prevent the dog from being exposed to the trigger. This requires you to be aware of the environment you're in, and at times, not just what is in front of you, but surrounding you as well. Although not ideal, if a dog is exposed to a trigger but is still under threshold, then you can still act to prevent an excessive reaction. In addition to being aware of your environment, maintaining good awareness of the dog and their body language can help. Dogs can provide subtle clues when they observe a trigger that you do not. An additional caution, a dog may encounter something new that is a trigger for them that you are not aware of, which is another reason to pay careful attention to the dog's body language. Techniques to avoid an excessive reaction can be grouped into buckets, such as prevention from seeing the trigger, for example, hiding behind a car, removing the trigger from view, maybe by going into another room, redirecting attention away from the trigger using methods like touch or floor hand toss, and moving away from the trigger, maybe by simply walking a different direction or using "let's go." Techniques can sometimes be combined. For example, using hiding behind a car and touch to distract a dog from a trigger. As a last resort, you may even need to overpower the exposure to a trigger by placing a handful of treats in their face. Use this method only if you can do so safely, particularly since the dog is in an aroused state. Our next video in this series on managing dog reactivity will show how to begin teaching a dog art, or attention redirection training, so that a dog can be exposed to a trigger without having an excessive reaction.